BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This is Don't Tell Me the Score, the podcast that uses sport to explore life's bigger questions. My name is Simon Mundie, and each week I sit down with an expert to discuss a sporting theme that tells us something important about life and how best to live it. Things like how to develop resilience, manage your mind and face your fears, through to self-acceptance and dealing with addiction, and even the benefits of walking, how to get a handle on your nutrition, and sleep better. My guests range from the biggest sporting names in the world to Buddhist monks, neuroscientists, and famous psychologists. Sports is described as a metaphor for life, and in this podcast I aim to prove that right. So if you dig past results, tactics and the score, there's plenty anyone can learn to help improve their life and understand the world around us. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Don't Tell Me the Score with the former F1 driver David Coulthard. David competed over 15 seasons, taking 13 Grand Prix wins and 62 podiums. Since retiring, he's been an F1 commentator, a pundit, and a successful entrepreneur. The theme of this episode is work ethic, and David certainly is a grafter, which is something that was instilled in him at a young age by his family. In this episode, we talk about making things happen, not waiting for them to happen to you. We discuss prioritising and what David learnt from the late, great Ayrton Senna. We discuss the art of conserving energy, as well as the importance of routine to allow your mind to declutter, and the value of the F1 honesty and responsibility culture and what other businesses could learn from it. We talk about why, generally speaking, multitasking is a bad idea, how to be efficient, as well as doing the hard thing first. And we do talk about lots of other things, including what he learned from having a brush with death, having been in a plane crash in the year 2000 that killed both the pilots. It really was a pleasure chatting to David, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. David Coulthard, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me on Don't Tell Me the Score. A pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely getting lots of practice at various recording platforms and being invited to various productions. So it's been interesting getting used to less physical contact in these interactions and trying to put faces to names and generally go on a little journey.
Indeed. How do you find recording things like this when you can't see someone face to face then?
I do prefer human interaction. That's definitely a big part of how I feel engage, whether somebody's, in the context of this conversation, if I touch on something and it triggers a thought, I'll be able to see that in your body language, and that might allow me to pause for giving you an opportunity to take it on a different tangent. Whereas in this situation, once you've kind of asked the question, unless you jump in, I'm going to monologue it until I run out of that particular subject.
Yeah, we're driving blind to some degree. Now, you were, of course, a very successful F1 driver, runner-up in 2001, 13 wins, top 3 5 times. The longevity that you enjoyed was a testament to your work ethic and your way of getting on with people. Then you made a really smooth transition into being a commentator, businessman, entrepreneur. So particularly that transition part of your skill set is something that you've always found pretty easy, and you've made smooth transitions the whole way through your working life. So how have you dealt with the transition then of dealing with coronavirus and the lockdown?
I only really had a couple of days where, mentally had a little wobble of, okay, this is real, and coming to terms with the length that we would be facing. So in terms of being told you now have to, not leave your home except for exercise and getting organized for that sort of thing, it was not complicated, not difficult, and it was fairly straightforward. But it was literally just that sort of coming to terms with, as things were being cancelled and as things were being removed from the diary, that it was clearing up windows of opportunity. So I have a great deal of sympathy for those that aren't as fortunate to have a number of different roles in different businesses. So as one goes into a sort of hibernate phase, it's opened up other opportunities with some of the other areas I'm involved. So it's just naturally seen me become, because quite clearly you cannot give 100% to two things. There's going to be an element of time management. So as a Grand Prix driver, I was 100% focused on being the fittest, fastest form of myself. In retirement and getting into other businesses, you then allocate your time to that business, and then you allocate other time to other business. So basically, long-winded way of saying it's given me an opportunity to give a little bit more focus to details that may or may not have been considered that important to me in the past, but it just gives you an opportunity. It's a bit like a spring cleaning your property, isn't it? It gives you a little chance to sort of spring clean your business and decide what's working and what isn't.
We're talking about work ethic, and you're a very organized man. You like planning. So obviously we really can't plan too much at the moment because everyone's in the dark to some degree about the future, when everything's going to get back to normal, if it's going to get back to normal. Have you found that difficult?
No, but the reason I hesitate to say no is as part of the way I'm wired, I tend to deal with the things that I can deal with and worry about the things that I have control over. And something like when we're allowed to travel again and when we're allowed to make those sorts of business plans is out of my hands. I'm in the same scenario as every other person in the world right now, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on whether your country's been more affected or less affected. So I haven't given too much concern to the things that I don't have in my control, and really it's been more a case of, say, focusing on elements of gain from this time, which is more time at home, more time with your family, more time to understand the sort of structure of the daily life. But equally, as I say, opportunity to freshen up in certain areas and regroup and energize for the inevitable release that's coming at some point in the future.
You mentioned compartmentalizing or touched on it there, and that's clearly something you're good at. And I want to come back to that. But as I mentioned, the theme really is around work ethic. And I know it's one of your absolutely core values, very much instilled in you by your family. I just want to go back to that time with your family and really how practically they instilled that work ethic in you. I mean, was it more a case of telling you to have a work ethic, or was it you observing their work ethic, a mixture of the two? I mean, how did they really get that into you?
Well, it was a mixture of the two, because my parents were, as well as having a loving relationship, we're also in a partnership in the business. Our family business is transportation. My father, his father passed away when he was 14. And the business was run by a family friend until my father was 21, and then he inherited the business, by which time he was already with my mother. And they set about rebuilding and growing that business, as well as building a family. So I have an older brother who's 3 years older. I had a younger sister who's sadly no longer with us, who was 6 years younger. And they went about the normal throes of what I'd call normal life in terms of Monday to Friday. But they would be, in some cases, away all week on business, seeing clients, socializing, building relationships with them, to be more than just a transport company. And they had to be very organized and structured to be able to do that. And then when they were at home, everything revolved around our family life, our family social life. Racing became a part of that. Of course, my father was a kart racer up until his father passed. So he still had a lot of enthusiasm for racing and supporting people in racing. So beyond the working week, the week became a preparation for the weekend, where we'd all jump in a motorhome and head off to whatever the racetrack was down south and watch the racing. And my mother would be, proactively catering for the team, and my father would be doing his sort of managerial role, and I'd be observing all this. So they really were 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. Okay, Christmas Day was a family day, but the transport company was still open. Trucks are running 24/7. So the mentality was that work is part of what you play into your daily life. And if you find work that you enjoy, it doesn't become that, oh God, I've got to get out of bed and go to work. It's, hey, right, all those things that I can achieve today, let's go do it. So
it's not about work-life balance. It's just life, work being part of life, as opposed to the whole work-life balance sort of ideology that people talk about.
Well, I think that everyone should use whatever terminology that makes sense to them. For example, I don't talk about having dreams because my grandmother told me that dreaming is what you do when you sleep and achieving is what you do when you work. But it's very common for people to say, oh, it was always my dream to be a singer or a footballer or to be a journalist or whatever their dream was. So I don't want to take away, just because I don't use those words, I don't want to take them away from other people. And as long as it means something to you. So I think it is important to enjoy what you do. And I think that you get more out of your life experience. If we start from the premise that none of us chose to be born, we can make certain choices once we're in life. But the choice of us coming into this world was made by two other people. And thereafter, you've got to make best of the situation. And we all know people who drag their heels. How are you today? Oh, yeah, you're depressed before you get the answer. And you get those who you ask how they are. And even if they could have a very clear open flesh wound, they would be saying, yeah, great, thanks. I'm really looking forward to today. It's just different people are wired differently. And I love that. And I don't, I certainly don't expect everyone to be wired my way. And I'll have deficiencies that I don't even realize because this is my normality. And occasionally someone will point them out to me. But largely speaking, we find a way of living and working together, whether that's in loving families or extended relationships or work. But I think it's important to enjoy what you do.
Sure. Is it fair to say that your family prioritized emotional and social and working skills in intelligence over pushing you at school? So more the sort of EQ, emotional intelligence side than the IQ side?
Yeah, 100%. My father was at an all-boys boarding school. He's dyslexic and therefore wasn't academically very good. And, back in those days, it wasn't something that was really a recognized condition. It was just you were the thicko or the dunce or whatever the name at the time was. And, my father tells us stories, and I'm sure there's an element of rose-colored spectacles where he was always the first to be told, just line up behind Coulthard for the belt at the end of any term because he would have the worst grades. I'm not sure it was quite like that, but anyway, that's his story. But he threw himself into sport, and he was he received the Victor Ladorum 2 years in succession, which is the champion of champion in sports at school. So he found naturally what he was good at and naturally kept away from what he wasn't good at. And I think there was an element of that in the way he approached life. And likewise, my mother. My mother was trained as a milk recorder. We're from the southwest of Scotland. It's a farming region. She was the eldest of 8. Her father was a train driver. Her mother was a nurse. And that's how my mother and father met, as she was travelling around the southwest of Scotland, going to various farms, testing the quality of the milk. And our transport company at that time had milk tankers and would take the milk from the farms to the local creamery to be made into cheese or whatever it was. So they came together, let's say, from maybe different financial backgrounds. And my father definitely had a more comfortable background than my mother, but they came at it with this sort of work ethic, get on and make things happen, with an ability to connect with people and to see the importance of business, not just being about doing a certain role. Business is about relationship, and quality of service isn't actually, in my father's eyes, and this is something he told me very early on, it's not about whether you can deliver 20 pallets of sugar from Glasgow to London for a certain price. It's how you deal, and customer service is how you deal with it when the truck doesn't turn up on time or there's a problem. It's your reaction to issues that he considers really important in delivering customer service, rather than just doing what people expect. And I get that, because if we go to a restaurant and order a burger, we expect a burger. If it turns up it's it's something else, then that becomes an issue to us. So we expect what we expect, and it's when it goes wrong, it's how people react to it that really determines whether we're happy or sad. So their view on school was do your best and make sure that you're not getting calls from the teachers saying that you're skiving or creating problems. But actually, more important to them was work ethic. They were constantly doing things as a family. And we were expected, my brother and my sister and I, to help in the household and earn our pocket money. No job was too small or insignificant, because in the overall scheme of, let's say, preparing a household, to make a household ready for action, everything has to be done, from cleaning the toilets to polishing the silver, if you're lucky enough to have silverware. Now, most people would look at the job of cleaning the toilets as, that's below me, I don't want to do that. Well, actually, it's just another job. Do it to the best of your ability. And it's only a problem if you decide it's a problem. And in life today, we see so many young people who go, well, I'm not doing that. That's not my job. Look, if you're part of a team, it's all our job. Let's just get it done. And let's do it to the best of our ability. And I'm the same today at almost 50 years old. To any task or any role, I never look at it and go, that's below me, or I'm not doing that. If it's there and it needs to be done, I'll get the rubber gloves on and get stuck in.
Yeah, they clearly did instill an incredible work ethic and a number of other things in you. And I want to touch on a few of the other lessons as well. But in terms of the racing being in the family blood, you mentioned your father was a karting champion. He had to stop it, earlier than he would have liked. Your brother and your sister raced, and you've described your elder brother as having the daredevil side. Your sister, you said, had the speed, and you had the work ethic, and you were the one to be successful. So first of all, that illustrates the importance of work ethic. But why did you have the work ethic in that way a bit more than your brother and sister did?
I think maybe being the middle child, I saw my brother sort of do the things that would be a step too far for my mother. My father was pretty easygoing. He was very, sort of strict and disciplined when it came to office. And I guess with his dyslexia, his office, everything had to be lined up a certain way for him to function. He couldn't have mess and disorder. And not that my mother was messy, but she was definitely the one that was, if there was some discipline, she was the one that was giving it out. My father sort of deferred to her on that one. So I guess I got the opportunity of seeing my brother make mistakes and me go, yeah. And I come from a generation where it was acceptable to get a clip round the ear if you did something wrong. Nowadays, our 11-year-old son will say to us, "Oh, you can't give me a clip round the ear, otherwise I'll phone social services." So it's a different world, and I accept we got to live for our time. So I worked out that looks like that might hurt, so I'll not do that. I'll avoid that. So I think that I definitely just got the benefit of the learnings of where to focus work and effort and attention to get the best results. The path of least resistance.
I've read an interesting book actually called Mind Games, in which it does say that it's much more likely for the second child to be successful. And I think it's interesting that you've, to some degree, bear that out. Your dad as well clearly taught you work ethic, obviously your mother as well. And they also taught you to be really self-sufficient. And a story I like that you've told is around when you got the opportunity to test drive an F1 car, the McLaren. And, you going and sort of suggesting it as a family trip or whatever. But your dad really saying, no, this is down to you. So can you just quickly tell that story and really the lesson that came out of it? Well,
if you go back to, say, my father raced karts until he was 14, lost the opportunity to continue after his father passed away. But once he had a business and was making success of that, he started to support other guys in racing. So I always went to kart races before I started racing, just as an observer. And then when I was 11 years old, I started karting because he already had a couple of guys, older guys racing in karts. So it was just part of his racing team, and that was his passion. And I therefore went from 11 years old through to going into cars when I was 17 every weekend I was somewhere with my parents racing and having success, having failure, having laughs together, crying together, all of the range of emotions that came with that, and the frustrations, of course, as you go through your teenage years and you become a bit more difficult, and having to deal with that whilst maintaining this sort of professional team. So if you picture those years and years of everything that was part of my development, when I won the Young Driver of the Year award, first year in cars when I was 17, I won both the junior championships. I got a call from Jackie Stewart, or Sir Jackie Stewart as he is now, to drive for his team the following year. And I'd won this award to drive the Formula One car. So at all stages, for years, my parents had come to everything. But when I moved to drive for Paul Stewart Racing, they knew some friends who lived in Milton Keynes, and that's where Paul Stewart Racing were based. And they phoned them up and said, can David come and stay with you? And I remember setting off in my car with all my bags, and I'd never driven on the motorway before. Actually, I'd been in a vehicle in the motorway, but I'd never actually physically driven myself on the motorway because I'd always gone racing as a family. I remember saying to my father, back then before sat-nav, I said, which roundabout did I got off the M6? And he was like, son, there's no roundabouts in the M6. And I was like, oh, okay. So off I said, turn up in Milton Keynes, find this lovely family, the Parias family. And I spend the next couple of years living with them as their lodger. And that was the first sort of, if you like, break from the family. And they would come to the races, but there was no other sort of, they weren't traveling together. And when I went to have this drive in the Formula One car, I just assumed they would want to come. So I called my father and said, look, I'm testing on this day. How are you? When are you coming down? And his words were, they're testing you, son. They're not testing me. Go and enjoy the drive. Try not to crash and call me afterwards. And that was it. That was the conversation. And it was, I didn't fully realize at the time, but it was further part of them sort of saying, look, you've got to do this on your own. We've been there all the way and we've enjoyed the journey and we'll still be part of it. But there's certain things you have to do on your own. And I really admire that, really respect it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's really a loving thing to do. I mean, you hear so many parents, and I've spoken to a few people on here, whose parents have, to some degree, and probably unwittingly, tried to live vicariously through their kids. And it clearly can be damaging. And despite your father's, own motor racing ambitions being thwarted, he clearly wasn't like that. And to sort of let you go like that, there must have been a pull on his side. But it is a real loving thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it maybe because of, again, his background, being at boarding school, maybe losing his father early. I loved my childhood. I'm not just saying nice things now because of the passing of time. I think actually my childhood has prepared as well for this lockdown period where growing up in a village, there wasn't a great deal to do. And therefore, in this modern world where we've got the ability to internet and we can email and we can still create and we can still contact, there's so much more to do. And even when you're not able to move around, and you can still keep fit in your house and your apartment. I know we like social interaction and we like to go to gyms, but there really isn't any excuse for being able to do those things if you have to. And clearly at this period we've had to. So I think all of this has prepared me for this time, and also helped me reflect on my childhood and family background of just being content with what you have. I am driven clearly to want to compete and want to be successful, but equally I've always been quite a content person. So it's almost like two people rolled into one. I have no problem to sit and just stare at the wall if that's all the options that are open to me. Whereas some people would be, our son, again, they'd be like, oh, there's nothing to do. And I'm like, you have got no idea. There's no such thing. The only thing that, only excuse for boredom is a lack of imagination. Just get your imagination going.
That's the ideal mix, really, isn't it? To strive for success and really, reach for the stars and try and be all you can be, whilst at the same time being grateful and happy with everything you have. So you're very fortunate to have those two sides to you. It's quite rare.
We're all wired differently, and it's the constant challenge in life, isn't it? To find why with some groups of people you're just compatible and it just feels right, In business, that's why it doesn't seem difficult, even in the difficult times, because you're surrounded by like-minded people. And in saying that, it's not about having people that say yes to all your ideas. Because when you are searching for the answers, you're looking for the people you work with to fill in the areas that you don't know. And with their knowledge and with your knowledge and experience, and you piece it together like a jigsaw, which just seems to make it comfortable. And I don't want to say easy, because of course business isn't easy, but some things are just difficult. You just can't find the communication with the individual. You just can't find a common ground. They don't seem to fill in the blanks that you have. They seem to conflict with some of the ideas that you feel very deep rooted are the way you want to go. It's really interesting, isn't it, how we're made as humans, why some things we're perfectly happy for someone to change their opinion on, and other things we're absolutely, that's it, and I'm not budging.
Yeah, we're all complex characters. There's no doubt about that. Now, your opportunity to drive in Formula One really came about because of the tragic death of Ayrton Senna at Imola in '94. Now, I want to ask you about what you learned from him about work ethic, and I've read a few things there. But the first thing that struck me was clearly, to follow Ayrton Senna, arguably, well, almost certainly the most iconic name, in Formula One history. Those are huge shoes to fill. And a lot of people would find that to be, a huge pressure. If you think of, say, for example, Sir Alex Ferguson, when he retired, obviously following him, everyone spoke about it being a bit of a poison chalice because the shoes were just too big to fill. Yet when you followed Ayrton Senna, you said that you didn't feel pressure, which I found really interesting, and to me suggests that pressure, therefore, is self-induced.
Well, it is a fact that I didn't feel pressure. And I think the benefit of youth is you don't know what you don't know. And, clearly, armed with the life experience I have today, I would have a lot more awareness of my own mortality than I didn't think I could be killed when I was in my 20s. But it just, when you're young and you don't have wife and kids and all the other things in life, then you're just focused and you're just going one direction. So I didn't feel pressure. Where I feel pressure is when I feel I'm losing control or I'm not in control. And in saying that, it's not because I'm a control freak, because there's so many things I don't know, and I know I'm not good at, and I know I don't have the patience to become good at. Therefore, there's just no point in me trying. So silly little things like logging into there's been so many different platforms I've used over the last few weeks, and some of them have worked seamlessly and I've made the call on time, and other things haven't quite worked and I've been a few minutes late. And I start to feel pressure because I don't like being late. And, it's disrespectful to those that are on time and you set things up. And I do feel pressure in that situation. But driving a Grand Prix car, I never felt pressure in driving and replacing Ayrton, because clearly I wasn't replacing him. He was gone. I was just now the next driver in the car, and he was the most, as you said, iconic driver, arguably the greatest driver. And all I could do out of respect was give 100% of my effort and try my very best. So, yeah, I guess we're all different to how we feel pressure and stress. And you see it in different environments. Some people going through airport security, you can see they're already a little bit tense because they're going to be asked to do things. And you've got others that, and sort of my approach is just to sort of go into a hibernate mode. And so possibly if anyone's seen me passing through airports, if I look a little bit space cadet, or I'm not quite there, it's the defense mechanism, because, it's sort of a hibernate mode of this is something I have to do. If someone engages with me, I'll re-engage, but I'm not looking for a big interaction. I just want to get through that phase and get to where I need to be.
Joe, I've seen you go through an airport, so that I can now relate to exactly what you're saying.
Did I look completely vacant?
You certainly look like you were focused on where you were going. Put it that way. So what did you learn from Ayrton?
Just when you mentioned that, sorry to jump in. I got a brilliant piece of advice once, which I've never really had the opportunity because of just the way the businesses have evolved that I'm part of. But I was told years ago that when you're doing a job interview with somebody, take them for a walk. Do the interview walking, because if somebody walks really slowly and I walk quickly, just the meandering, what do I want to meander for? And it's not that I can't go for a walk in the countryside, but I quite like to do more of a power walk than a meander. And anyway, so the thing I was told was when you're interviewing someone for a job role, take them for a walk. And interestingly, and Eddie Jordan does this, when you ask him a question when you're walking, he stops walking. He can't answer and walk at the same time. And it's the weirdest thing. And we've pointed it out to him over the years of working with him on television. And of course, he gets frustrated because it's just the way you'll be walking along and you ask him a question, he goes to answer and he stops. And you realize you're 2-3 steps in front of him. And it's like, why have you stopped? And he doesn't even realize he stopped. So we're all wired differently. But it's obviously his legs stop working when his mouth starts to go.
So just back to Senna, work ethic. And I read some stuff about, the different approaches of Alain Prost and Nigel Mansell, but that you were particularly impressed with the work ethic of Ayrton Senna, and it made you realize, that you can't get by just on talent alone. So what were the key things around work ethic you took from the great Brazilian?
They just understand the opportunity. They understand the role. So, I sometimes think that I didn't really get on top of fitness early enough, and I didn't really get on top of certain things early enough when now using the benefit of experience. But actually, if I delve deeper and accept the fact I can't go back, I think you can only do certain things at certain phases of your life. Now, some people are naturally more, they're naturally better at, say, sales and marketing and putting themselves forward. It took me a long time to get the confidence to have a voice in a group and to feel, I sort of maybe slightly influenced from my village boy experiences. But I didn't really know where I fitted in until a bit later in life. So I think that, with that, it took me a little bit longer to evolve. And likewise, in terms of understanding how hard you could work. I remember when I was 17, I went to Jersey because my father had a friend whose kids went to school with a Grand Prix driver called Derek Warwick. And Derek is, a friend now, and obviously I know who he is, but at that time he was a person from the television and he was in a sport that I wanted to do. And we had this lunch. He very kindly gave his time and gave some advice. And he asked me what I did for training. And I remember saying, well, it's really difficult to find the time. And he was like, if you're serious, you'll find time. So coming back to the point of work ethic, he actually invited me to go for a run with him at 7 the next morning. And I managed to sleep in. I didn't wake up. And it's not because I'm a lazy person. I just didn't get, at 17, I hadn't quite managed to prioritize the opportunities. So what I think I learned from someone like Ayrton was he'd learned by the stage he was there in his career of just really understanding where he needed to put the effort, the engineers, the mechanics, the amount of time it took at the racetrack. And you learn either through personal experience or by example. And it was a great example to see that he'd come into the track when he wasn't driving, but just to listen to my conversations with engineers and my feedback, because that was an important thing for him. Could he trust the test driver? So it showed that he didn't take anything for granted.
Something else that you've spoken about learning progressively over the course of your career was the art of conserving energy on race weekends. And I think this is something that relates as well to normal life in the way that we allow ourselves to be sapped of energy by various things, phones, social media, too much news, whatever it may be. But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about, what you learned about conserving energy when the race weekend came around later in your career compared to the start?
Yeah, as your career develops, then the demands on your time become higher, because as you're becoming more successful, then you get more recognition, and then the race fans will want some of your time, and the sponsors will want some of your time. When you're relatively unknown, you can just sort of move around, and nobody knows who you are, and the sponsors haven't built any campaigns around you. So being able to manage your time and be disciplined with your time is very important. And I've always been someone that has a sort of dip in how I feel during the course of a day. I've never been a big napper, but I do nap. And so that maybe sounds a bit of a contradiction, but in the throes of a normal day, if I'm at home, then I wouldn't have a nap, say. But when I'm traveling, which is what was my normal life before, I'd be on 3-4 flights a week, I would have a nap on the plane. I would have a nap in the car. So I'd be catching up with my energy and topping up my energy and allowing me to be able to wake up early and go to bed late by having these series of naps. So that the way I've been wired, it's always important for me, like before a Grand Prix, I'd want half an hour of quiet time before I went to the garage, just to, catch my breath, to lie down. I wouldn't necessarily have a sleep, but I just needed some quiet to, declutter my mind and get focused on the job ahead. So I think having a discipline to understanding what you need and how to structure that time is really important. And I think also having a routine is why does Nadal bounce the ball 10 times, or however many times he bounces the ball? He's not doing it because he's not sure how bouncy the ball is. He's doing it because it's a routine that enables him to muster up the energy for the serve or whatever it is. If it was banned and you're only allowed to throw the ball up and hit it, they would all learn how to do that. They would still play tennis. But we get into what is our routines, and those routines are important because they allow the brain to sort of declutter, if you like. And I think you're right. I think the people have got so many distractions today that they find it difficult to actually just do one thing. I see, I have a stepdaughter, our son is 11. Quite often I'll see them walking around with their phone in their hand, looking at the phone. Now, of course, I occasionally do that because I'll be going somewhere, sending a text that needs to get sent, and I need to get somewhere. And so therefore, when I break my own guidelines to them by saying, guys, there's nothing that you need to be, that's so important in your phone right now that you can't walk to where you need to be and then look at your phone, because neither of them work. I'm going to assume they're not dealing with really big pressure deadlines when they're in the apartment. So I just don't want them to be in the habit of thinking they can't walk from A to B without having their phone and without taking in information. Just do one thing at a time. And I very often have that conversation with our son, because he's a bit more potentially influential at 11, where if you assume someone else has the same talent as you, if you give 99% effort to a task and the other person with the same talent gives 100%, which person would you expect to complete it more quickly or to do it better? It's a fairly simple question, isn't it? With a very straightforward answer. Now, if you're being pedantic, you could go, well, it depends what the task is, and blah, 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 blah. But actually, if you assume that 100% of effort is going to give you a higher result than 99, then there's only one answer to that. So I think it's a luxury and a joy in life to be able to give 100% to one role, because modern society and modern life, as families, people are multitasking. And as I mentioned, I grew up in a family where my parents were running a business, running a household, educating a family, but they somehow managed to compartmentalize what the roles were at any given time. And we knew if my father was on the phone, it was a business call, it wasn't a social call. And therefore you didn't disturb him out of respect. So you learn when you can disturb someone and when not to disturb him in that environment. So I think to me, it's all fairly straightforward and logical, but to some people it seems to pose such major sort of complications and concern.
Certainly. Interestingly, I've actually got a phone. I'm recording this in my living room, and I'm reading a book at the moment called Smartphone, Dumb Phone, and it's talking all about phone addiction and that kind of thing. And clearly, we're not wired to multitask. And I think the science backs it up that if you flick from one thing to the other, it does make you less focused and less effective at both things. So doing one thing at a time is clearly the way to go. I mean, the obvious example would be when you're in the F1 car, there's no way you would have been thinking about what you're going to be doing that evening, or indeed what you'd done the day before. You've got to be completely in the present, or you wouldn't have been able to drive that car at all. Something that you speak about a lot, that you've learned from Formula One, and that you've noticed with the contrasts with some of your careers after Formula One was the sort of the honesty culture and the responsibility culture that is endemic to F1. And then you contrasted it with, I know when you came out and did TV, and you were looking for the feedback in the same way, that the sort of very, very direct feedback. And you've spoken about, for example, someone might have won a Grand Prix, but you'll still have that debrief where go, yep, you've won, well done, but you were late into turn 4. What happened? Can you just talk a bit about the responsibility culture of F1 and what other industries, businesses, families, people, whatever, can learn from that?
Well, I think that in business, a lot of family businesses have that similarity. Self-employed people have that similarity because the buck stops with you. The success or failure is down to the family unit or the family business, or the self-employed individual needs to have the motivation to get up and to deliver the customer service, which is that can-do attitude, that I will do. You can call on me, and I'll be your person that will deliver for you. And I think in a lot of businesses, when they get much bigger, or the big multinationals or state-owned businesses, where it seems more a sort of them and us, the employees represented by their unions, and the board of directors or the shareholders, there's almost like the conflict within the company before you actually go out into the competitive marketplace. So I think that when in sport, everyone is there for the same reason, whether it's the marketing people or the media people or the mechanics or the engineers or the driver or whoever it is, back at the base and design and manufacture, everyone is there because they are competitively driven to want to be part of that every 2 weeks or every week success or failure, and accept that their best work one weekend, they've got to somehow reinvent themselves and come up with even better the following week. They don't just go, there you go, that's absolutely brilliant, I've delivered my very best in the first week in January, and then expect that they just need to do the same thing over and over and over. The evolution of mankind and the evolution of technology is such that you have to aspire to improve no matter what you've done. So to be within that space is a very addictive space. And therefore, whether you're the driver or whether you're the designer, one of the most successful designers is Adrian Newey. There's many others, but let's say Adrian Newey. You can say to Adrian, oh, the car's not very good in this area. Now, you're effectively saying to Adrian, your design's not very good in this area. But he'll be like, right, okay, let me try and understand how I can fix that. Or Michael Schumacher or Lewis Hamilton, the team will go, you made a mistake at the start again. Why do you keep doing the same thing? What can we do to help you not make that mistake? Because it's, they've clearly identified it's a human error on his side rather than a system error. And he won't take offense and go, I'm a 7-time world champion, how dare you? He'll go, right, sorry, okay, this is what I'm doing and this is why it happens. There is just this openness in the spirit of we all want to be better, to take it on the chin. And it's actually really interesting because as much as I experience that and expect that within my businesses, I have to be honest and say there'll be times where, maybe I'm eating a pizza in a restaurant and it's a bit cold, or a steak and it's maybe a bit more rare than I'd really wanted. If it's basically within, acceptable parameters, and somebody comes and goes, how's your food? Someone from the restaurant, I probably would just go, oh, yeah, it's fine, thank you. I won't say, oh, my goodness, this is the best steak or the best pizza, because that would be being completely insincere. But I'm being a little bit insincere and not quite true to my values if I admit that sometimes I'll go, yeah, it's fine, because I just don't want to have the interaction. I'd rather just eat it, get the food and the calories and go. And actually, my wife has pointed this out to me, that, I love food, but really, because of the way I'm wired, it's more a fuel than it is. Some people will book a restaurant 3 months in advance and the wine, and they'll pontificate about how amazing it all is. I love a good meal and it's lovely to have a nice glass of wine, but I would hate to think that moment defines the rest of my life. You know what I mean? I made myself an egg sandwich for lunch because I fancied an egg sandwich, and it was brilliant. Very happy. Now, could someone else have made a better egg sandwich? Almost certainly, but it was perfectly within acceptable parameters.
Well, I heard you talk about your first experience doing commentary with the BBC, and that you weren't entirely confident about your performance. I'm sure it was very good, but you wanted that feedback and were somewhat taken aback, surprised that they didn't give the constructive feedback in the same way that you were used to within Formula One. Is that true?
Yeah, and I see it so much in other business where you'll go to people and say, what do you think? And I guess a little bit like I'm saying that I have done in restaurants where you go, yeah, it's fine, thank you. Because it's just easier in that context. But in the context of business and working together, I don't think it's acceptable to say it's fine if it isn't fine. And I don't have a problem with someone saying you didn't do what we discussed, because if we discussed it and I didn't do it, they've got an absolutely valid and fair point to tell me. If they say, why were you not there at 5 to 11 for the interview with Total Wolf? And I go, well, did you tell me to be there? And if they go, no. And I go, well, how on earth do you expect me to be somewhere if you don't tell me where I'm supposed to be? But if they did tell me, and they said it was going to be a 2-camera, and the director was going to cue me up, and it was 1 camera and the director doesn't cue me up, I would still understand somehow to get the interview done. But I would want to then say to them, look, you told me this was going to happen and it didn't. Let me understand why it didn't happen. I just think that's the normal part of debriefing, to understand how we all work together and how we become better. To not debrief, to not understand where our weaknesses are. Because even if you've won something, if you actually analyze what was the thing that could have tripped you up from that victory, then that's your weak spot. So if you strengthen your weak spot, you therefore might identify another weak spot in the whole overall chain. But if you can strengthen that, and then you identify the next week, what you're doing is constantly keeping yourself above the line of potential failure. If you just go, well, we won, let's not change anything until the next event, your competition are understanding why they didn't win, are improving that, and could come back and beat you the next one. And therefore you're going, oh, well, hold on a minute, what went wrong there? Well, what went wrong is you didn't look at where your potential failures were. Where are your weak spots? Where is your competition? Where can you improve?
That honesty and feedback you talk about, particularly in terms of business, I mean, it can be applied as well to, and should be applied to relationships, for example. It's easy for people not to express their wants and needs in a relationship, and that's how resentment can bubble away under the surface. And even with yourself, that honesty with yourself, I think, is true as well. You talked about failure, and I know you speak about failure being where opportunities lie. So can you just talk a little bit about making opportunities, how it relates to failure, as well your commitment to getting out and making things happen? So for example, you did it back in, with Formula 3, and then also at the end of your career when you moved to Red Bull, and you're very much about making things happen, and that ties back into work ethic as well.
Yeah, I think that this is part of understanding that even though we have families and those around us that support us, ultimately the decisions you make and the motivation to get out of bed in the morning and to prioritize and get organized, it lies with you. It's a classic thing, and that you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I've never actually taken a horse to water, and I've never seen whether they don't naturally drink or not. But I'm going to assume the expression has some merit to it. But I think just having self-motivation, I think you can be trained to be more motivated, because I think I have become more motivated as I've gone through the journey of life, as I naturally, in the early days, your family point you in the right direction and support you. And you obviously have to have an element of motivation. But I think they definitely you can learn from people around you how they tackle things. And the expression, if you want something done, ask a busy person. I never really understood that when I was younger. But of course, I do understand it now, because I'm very much somebody there. To actually busy people are good at prioritizing. They're good at focusing their mind and saying, right, let's just get this done now, rather than putting it off and postponing and delaying. So I think that just you see people that are. We all know, you see it in emails and what have you. Some people that you send a mail and you're not getting a response any time in the next few days, even in texts. I've got friends, people that I enjoy spending time with, but I say to them, you are like really, really bad at responding. And they'll go, yeah, mate, I know. And I go, well, you say it like it's kind of like, one, you recognize that you're bad at doing it, but you kind of go as if, well, you should accept that. Well, if you're like that in business, maybe they're not, but if they are like that in business, I just wouldn't want to do business with them. It's just too slow and too painful.
And you are excellent at responding, I have to say. I mean, we were introduced via email, and I was really noted how quick you were at sort of getting back. I mean, of all the interviewees that I've had, and I've had sort of 90 odd now on the show, like certainly you were the most punctual and quick. So that's clearly something that I understand that you value. And you talk about attention to detail, being organized, and even pre-organized. I like what you said about, when you come back from, back in the days when you were traveling so many times a week, you'd come back and unpack your bag and then immediately repack it, because it's about efficiency and being planned and making sure that by working smart and cleverly now, you will save time in the future.
Well, simple little things like that. If we spoke earlier about, as humans, if we do one thing, we're more efficient at it. But there's clearly some things we can do, multi things, like you can be brushing your teeth and putting things away in a cupboard, because it doesn't take a lot of brain power to brush your teeth. So you can use your other hand for something else, and that's just time efficient. So clearly there's a distinction between when things really matter, being totally focused. And, I see it where somebody will, I've actually watched somebody individually wash grapes, pick a grape from the fruit bowl, walk to the sink, wash it, walk back, get another grape, walk to the sink. And I just watched this dumbfounded to the inefficiency. Just decide how many grapes you might fancy. And if you don't eat them all now, putting a washed grape back in the fruit bowl is not going to upset anyone. It's not like opening a banana, taking a bite and putting it back. But anyway, we're all wired differently. And I think you can learn by pointing out to people, look, some things you can do multiple things. So things like getting back and getting unpacked straight away. I think we all know those where they'll come through the door and they'll dump the bag, they'll come back from a trip, and it'll sit there until the next morning. I go straight through to my room, empty the bag, dirty laundry goes in the laundry basket, clean items go away, everything's done. And if I know where the next trip is, if it's the next day, I'll just pack the bag again, and it's ready to go. So I now, in the space of, probably takes me 5-10 minutes, no more than that. But in the space of a few minutes, instead of just sitting down on the sofa and wasting time, I might have put the kettle on. By the time the kettle's boiled, because I fancy a cup of tea, I've emptied, reset, and ready to go. Whereas a lot of people will pile it over to the next day. It just then becomes mental baggage of things you have to do. And I remember Ron Dennis years ago saying to me, and you learn from different people different things. And he said, write it down. And I said, well, why are you really emphasizing writing it down? He says, well, I write things down so I can forget. And what he meant, of course, is if you try and remember everything, you'll forget something, because unless you've got that ability to really have a photographic memory, which I don't, and Ron clearly was someone similar. But if you write it down on a daily task piece of paper, then it'll stay there written down. And if you go back to it, it'll still be there reminding you what it is. So you don't have to remember it if it's written somewhere where it will be remembered. So there's simple little things we can all do that can help us to be better organized, and tackling the small, insignificant jobs first, so they're done, is one way I would deal with it. And then equally, if there's a big, messy job to be done, I get up and get stuck straight into it. Get the thing that's the most painful out of the way first, and the rest of the day just becomes a wee bit easier. Whereas if you keep putting it off and keep putting it off, and of course I've been there at various phases in my life, but I just know now, it's just better to be efficient.
I mean, it is all kind of common sense, really, isn't it? I mean, all the best wisdom tends to be. Are you getting? Is your son Dayton? Is he soaking all this up? Is he following in his father's footsteps in terms of being organised and planning and efficient and well turned out and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I only have one son, so I can't really compare. My brother and I were quite different. Even all three of us were different from the same parents. So I can only compare in terms of from my wife's point of view. My stepdaughter has her particular personality. Dayton has his particular personality, and I found him, because he's homeschooling at the moment. He was sort of resetting his desk last night because he's got mirrors behind, and he worked out that you could see in the reflection of the mirror certain items on his desk, and he wanted to tidy it up to make it look either better or be more impressive to his other friends. So, I noticed he's put like a little hand plastic pellet gun. That's obviously for his little mates who like shooting little plastic guns, and he's put some of the technical Legos that he's built. That's obviously to impress somebody else. So he's obviously decided he'll put all those things. The teacher won't notice them, but his friends who are looking in the reflection in the mirror will notice. And so, yeah, in that respect, I was quite surprised and impressed last night that he's giving that detail. But he is quite switched on little kid. And actually, my wife is Belgian, and I often joke about how British have got the sense of humour, and Belgians aren't always noted for the sense of humour. But she came away with a brilliant, and it's just as having fun, of course. I'm sure every nationality has got the right to claim a humour. But we were talking once, and our son's got a high IQ, and of course the typical thing where friends we were talking to said, "Well, are you sure he's your son, David?" And my wife, who's quite quiet mostly, just very calmly says, "Well, I know he's mine." And it was just the reality of her putting the doubt in everybody's mind as to, am I really the father? And, I'm fairly certain that I am. But anyway, I just thought it was a good little bit of humour. So anyway, his organised side and his high IQ side is a result of the DNA that he has. But yeah, to answer your question, he does seem to be getting quite organised and structured. And what I'm interested to see with him, that when he really is into something, he will spend a long time doing it. So again, technical Lego, he's 11 years old. So he'll start something and he'll spend hours doing it. Whereas other things, he seems to have a very short attention span. And I think I can relate to that. If I'm not really interested in something, like if it was trying to understand how to download some new software or something a bit too complex, I just lose interest very quickly because I don't have that skill. I don't have that patience, and therefore I won't do it properly. And therefore I'm better. My wife is much better at that and enjoys it. And so again, this is the power of team. And this is where my whole life has been about team. The family team unit, the racing team unit, the business I'm involved in is about team. We all have different skills. And what one person doesn't particularly enjoy, somebody else does. And again, it's not about whether it's a menial task or a time-consuming task, because I've said, when I'm in the production office with our production business, and when I'm in the production office, I'll make the tea for everybody, not as some sort of statement of, hey guys, you're all really nice and I'm going to make you a cup of tea, because they're busy doing important things that I don't have the skills or interest to do, the skill being the main thing. And I do have the interest in making a cup of tea. I do have the skill to do that, and I don't mind it. I don't mind washing up, so I'll just do it. Where some people go, I'm not doing that. That's somebody else's job. Well, no, we all can find things we're good at.
And that relates back to what you were saying earlier. And just quickly on your son, it's clear the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree with his ability to focus, and it certainly sounds like he's got that organised side that he shares in common with you. Something I know that you speak to Dayton about is, or a quote that I've read is that you say that you tell him is, if you're polite and respectful, you'll get almost everything that you hope for. And, the value...
Work for. Almost everything you work for. That's the distinction.
Okay,
I always say, if you're polite...
I wrote that round wrong. But so that shows the value of the personal relationships. And that's something that you've been very good at throughout your your life, through your career. So, what do you say about? Because we've talked about work ethic, but the value of working on those relationships. For example, getting in front of people rather than emailing and that kind of thing.
Well, I think relationships are the core of sustainable business, because a lot of things we might just engage in over a website or whatever it happens to be. You can very easily buy it and it'll be delivered, and you don't have to have an interaction with anyone else. But a lot of business is still based around somebody not only buying into your company's services, but having trust in the people that are providing those services, that if and when it goes wrong, which it will at some point, because there's no such thing as faultless life. Life has its faults, business has its faults, but it's about the ability to understand those faults and improve on them. You might have the occasion where things don't go wrong, of course, or there's nothing noticeable, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking for what could have gone wrong and where we can be better. So I think that human interaction is not going to go out of fashion, even off the back of COVID-19, where clearly this is a major reset for this generation. Other generations have had major resets in the way they can human interact, but history would suggest that the need for shared experiences, the desire to want to look at strangers. We're drawn to go to public areas, not just because, a public park, if you're there on your own, feels a little bit strange unless you were looking to be entirely alone. It's a bit like walking into a restaurant when it's empty. You always think, what's the matter with this restaurant if there's no one else in here? We like to, the validation of other people being around.
Penultimate thing, David, and it's about the power of belief, because your father, going back to your father, it sounds like he had two moments of utter genius amongst many, I'm sure, but dropping the seed in your mind when you were a young, 14, 15, that you would go on to be an F1 driver at a time when you didn't necessarily think it was possible. And then later on, dropping the seed that you should think about getting into television, which aided your transition out of motorsport and into television so seamlessly. So I thought those were two absolute masterstrokes. What does that say about belief and how it relates to opportunity? And what did you make of those gestures, if you like, from your father?
I think it's really, I should ask him why he was so confident, or maybe he wasn't confident. It was just, he was thinking it through. He was, to use the word that I wouldn't normally use, dreaming that I would have the opportunity and the talent to make it to Formula One, because he absolutely did talk about when you get to Formula One when I was about 14 years old. And he did talk at that same time about, if you're lucky, you'll have a 10-year career. So we'd listen to Murray Walker and James Hunt, and he was like, look, James Hunt's moved into broadcasting. Even today, my father will ask me, and he's retired, and my mother and him, they're in lockdown up in Scotland. And when they're not in lockdown in Scotland, they just continue to travel the world, just living this life of discovery and enjoying the opportunities that they have. So they've always been kind of motivated that way. But I think that he obviously had a vision and belief to sow seeds. And today he'll still ask me, how's business? Is everything okay? It's almost like he still worries about you, still worries that you've got the next step planned. And I think it is about that. It's about planning. It's about, not just looking at where you are, it's looking to where you would like to be. And, so I remember somebody using the expression about, you don't dress for the job you're doing, you dress for the job that you want to be doing. The point of that, of course, is it's always about trying to have a vision for where you want to be, as well as understanding how you are the best at what you can be at this moment.
Last question, David. You, in 1995, had a crash where you were knocked unconscious. And then, of course, when you were 29, I think it was, were involved in the plane crash where the two pilots died. So you had real close brush with mortality. And I spoke to Sir John Kerwin, the rugby union player, just yesterday. And he, it was a shame actually, it was at the end of our conversation. And he said his father said to him that he didn't start living until, I think he had a cancer diagnosis when he had a brush with death. And he said he didn't really start living until that point. And I've heard you talk about the plane crash in particular being a bit of a kick up the backside, for want of a better word for you, in terms of realigning your priorities and that kind of thing. What did you get from those brushes, and particularly the plane crash, in terms of your outlook, in terms of being grateful, and in terms of the way you looked at life generally, and what advice could you share with anyone else having been that close to your own mortality?
Well, I think that everybody, myself included, tends to take each day as it comes and not really consider the fact that there could be an accident today that is fundamentally going to either change your life or end your life. And, two unrelated things, driving a race car, it would be considered a higher risk environment. So therefore, I'd always been conscious and aware that the ultimate price could be death, and was able to, out of the overwhelming desire to compete and enjoyment from doing so, that was more than enough compensation right now for the potential downside if it was ever to be the case. So being knocked out in a crash, in my simple mind, was you don't go, oh, I'm about to be knocked out. The lights just go out. And in my simple mind, death is when the lights never come back on again. And in my case, the lights came back on, and you go, oh, where am I? Oh, I'm here. Oh, yep. And then you remember to a greater or lesser extent what happened prior to the accident. And then the plane crash, completely unrelated to driving racing cars. It just happened to be, a week before a Grand Prix. Again, sadly, the pilots were killed, and I'm walking away from the wreckage of an aircraft. What are the chances of that? And realizing that could have been it. Am I happy with the decisions I've made up until I was, I think, 30 years old? Am I happy with the way I'm living my life? Am I appreciative? Am I telling the people that matter to me what I think? And it helps. And in the same way, actually, this whole lockdown, COVID-19, I'm sure a lot of people have been reappraising the way they live, the things that they enjoy, dealing with smaller jobs that they've been putting off that are important because, clearing out your closet or clearing out the garage, these things are, because it's in your mind to do it, you're carrying that mental baggage. That's why I say just do things as soon as you can, because then you no longer have the baggage. You no longer, the clearer you can have your mind, the more free you live, and and that's where when you're young and you don't have responsibilities, I think things just, there's no pressure, you just live. And as we get older and we've got, bills to pay and families and all the rest of it, this wonderful baggage, having a family, is something else we have to consider and make, more than just selfish decisions about. So I think there's a number of things that you pick up from those moments that help you reset. And therefore, as much as I would never want anyone else to go through those, I think they were fundamentally life-changing and life-enhancing experiences for me.
David Coulthard, it's been an absolute pleasure. You've been very, very generous with your time. I'm very appreciative and full of interesting gems and anecdotes. So all that's left is for me to say thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Don't Tell Me the Score with David Coulthard. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And as ever, I would be delighted to hear what you think. The best place to get hold of me on social media is probably Twitter. I don't tend to check the other platforms too much. I'm at Simon Mundie. Of course, if anyone fancies giving this show a kind review wherever possible, always very gratefully received. And if you were able to share this episode, or indeed just tell anyone about Don't Tell Me the Score, I would be incredibly grateful. It really does make a huge difference. Thanks to everyone who's been in touch recently. I'm trying to reply to every single message, and there is perhaps just a slight backlog, but I will get round to it, I promise. Anyway, thanks again for listening. I do appreciate it. And I hope you'll join me again next time on Don't Tell Me the Score.
I find quantum mechanics confusing today.
Hello, I'm Brian Cox.
And I'm Robin Ince, and the Infinite Monkey Cage is back for a new series, and we are dealing with so many fantastic ideas, and even better, no one that we've asked has got an alibi for getting out of doing the show. So in this series, we have got, well, the first episode alone, we talk about the end of the universe with Brian Greene, Katie Mack, Eric Idle and Steve Martin. Yes, you heard that. Steve Martin and Eric Idle are joining us. Anyway, enjoy the new series. We're having a fantastic time making it. Brian's particularly enjoying it because he's hundreds of miles away from me and they're just using technology to create some sense of proximity. That's the great thing about it all.
That's the Infinite Monkey Cage on BBC Sounds now. Well, not now. I mean, there's no unique definition of now in physics. Simultaneity is relative. It's on BBC Sounds, anyway.
Unless you've got that Robin Ince and Professor Cox, I'd leave that poor pussy alone in its box. That cat may be as dead as a rat. You can wage in the Infinite Monkey